Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We are very pleased today to have Mr. Ken Szabo, that over his career of 44 years had multiple positions in the field of chemistry, manufacturing, supply chain management, information technology. He progressed from the polymer research chemist to overseeing a chemical pilot plant, producing experimental products for the packaging industry. Issues with lighting led him to his latest venture with Silas and the founding inventor. Ken joined Silas in 2019 as its CEO and has been working on developing innovative lighting that has significant health and wellness implications. Over to you, Mr. Szabo.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach. Dr. Durbach said I'm CEO of Silas. I joined the company in 2019 at the request of the founding member, Scott Zimmerman, who's really the brainchild behind a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. The focus of our company is how our natural environment can be used to supplement the science behind medicine and health. We've primarily been focusing our work on lighting, and has even taken us into some virus mitigation relating to COVID and some other areas. But what I really want to focus on today is how artificial lighting has impacted not only our health as humans, but the health of plants and animals as well around the world. I want to start by going through a brief history of lighting and see exactly how we got to where we were today. Humans were designed to benefit by being in nature. And for the most of history, we were in an outdoor environment, living outdoors, working with fire and with candles as our source of lighting. Edison invented the light bulb in 1880. And that's pretty much changed the way we operated as human beings. We're now able to do things into the dark, work into the night, being able to support things that we normally couldn't do during the day. It's obviously a very boon to technology. The only problem with the technology was it's very energy inefficient. 90% of the energy that is used to light an incandescent light bulb is wasted. Only 10% of it is used to produce the lighting that we need to see. So obviously we need to do something along this line. So we invented fluorescent lights to reduce energy consumption. And ultimately the Department of Energy in the United States effectively banned the use of incandescent light bulbs, and they were replaced by what we know as LEDs, light emitting diodes. On the surface, this sounded really great. Over 16% of the worldwide energy is used to produce lighting. So if we can reduce this number, it's a significant number of terawatts that we could be reducing from our power plants, which would greatly help with emissions of greenhouse gases. But here's the issue. Nobody understood the unintended consequences of making the decision from going from incandescent to ultimately LED lights. The LED light and the industry's sole focus was on saving energy. And they did a great job with that. An 8-watt LED light bulb produces the same amount of light as an old-fashioned 60-watt incandescent bulb. But here's where it gets interesting. And we need to talk about sunlight for a few minutes. Sunlight, excuse me, the light we see from our eyes, which I'm going to refer to as the visible spectrum, only composes about 20 to 25% of what the sun emits. 70% of it is in another part of the spectrum, which is called the near infrared. Now, for those of you with any technical inclinations, the visible spectrum measured in wavelengths, which is the measurement of light, goes from 400 to 700 nanometers, and the near infrared goes from about 750 up to 1400. So it's a fairly wide spectrum in relation to what the sun is producing. There's also ultraviolet light, which is down past the purple and blue, and then the far infrared. UV we've associated with the development of vitamin D and the relationship between that and sunburn and skin cancer. That's a topic for a different presentation. And we're all familiar with the far infrared. If you go outside in the sun, you feel the warmth on your back. That's the far near infrared radiation reacting with the water in your body, causing it to heat up, and you feel it as warmth. The near infrared portion, which is this area right in here, is totally invisible to the human body. You can't touch it, you can't see it, you can't feel it. And unlike visible light, let me change slides here. Visible light only penetrates our body about a micron. And to put that in perspective, a human hair is 50 microns in diameter. So 1 micron is pretty insignificant. Near infrared, which is really interesting, penetrates the body well over an inch. And it has some amazing interaction with the human body. And unlike visible light, which is either absorbed or reflected, and that's what creates the colors that we see, near infrared bounces off of most surfaces, so that even in the shade of a tree, we're constantly being bombarded by this energy. As I mentioned before, there was something good in that 90% of the energy wasted in the incandescent bulbs. The incandescent bulb was producing an amazing amount of near infrared energy. In fact, it's probably more efficient at producing the near infrared than it was in visible light. So we fast forward to fluorescent lights and LEDs. The technology behind these lights didn't allow for the near infrared spectrum to be included in the bulb. But at the same time, remember, we didn't understand the need for the near infrared spectrum within our lives. And the closer the industry got to approaching the red part of the spectrum, which was done to help balance the colors that we see, it caused the energy consumption to skyrocket. So they just stayed within the parameters that would give them the most energy efficient bulb and create light that we can see with. Another factor that came into play with what we're discovering is that, again, the Department of Energy mandated that we apply coatings to all of our window glass. It's referred to as low emissivity glass. And it was designed to block damaging ultraviolet from coming in from fading furniture and so forth, as well as the far infrared to prevent heat gain from taking place within a building for air conditioning efficiencies. What they didn't realize, again, was they were blocking everything in the spectrum except the visible. So if you look at this particular slide, you can see old-fashioned glass pretty much allowed everything to come in. The low E glass only blocked the visible, and most of the near infrared was emitted from this. This didn't happen all at once. We went from a gradual progression from the incandescents to fluorescents to LEDs, and not all buildings now have low E glass in them, but most of them are being converted as windows are being replaced and new construction is taking place. So what's happened? If you look at over time, as our exposure to sunlight has been decreasing, and right now we spend an average of over 90% of our time indoors. The latest number I read just recently was 94%. So it's gone up a little bit from the time we did some of our research. What we notice is that as our lifestyle has changed, we've seen a remarkable increase in chronic illnesses such as dementia, autism, skin cancer, myopia. All these are mirroring our decrease in exposure to near infrared. Now, let me be clear here. I'm not saying that the reduction in near infrared is a total causal effect of all these things increasing. There are obviously other factors such as food additives, environmental issues, and dare I say, medicines and vaccines. But the data is pretty solid to show that there is some kind of a correlation going on here. And the medical community now is recently coming on board, pretty much supporting the concept that our indoor lighting and our lack of sunlight is probably a major contributor to the effect of these diseases increasing. I'm going to show you just a brief look at the biology of what happens with near infrared energy. It interacts with our cells at many levels, and it's the primary factor in the cell's ability to create ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate is called the energy currency of the cells. It's the molecule that works with metabolism, particularly with energy transfer within the cells. It's the primary energy source for the cells in our body. It's even more important than food. And what's interesting is the only chemical molecule in the body that can be directly converted into energy. If we digest food, that needs to go through a conversion process. And we see an example of this in nature. We can look at an albatross, which stays in the air for days and months at a time. A young albatross has been theorized to stay in the air for several years before it touches land. Biologists theorize that they are metabolizing the energy directly from the sun to help them stay aloft. The near-infrared has also been shown to increase blood flow and help remove toxic waste that build up in our cells. Just as a car engine needs to have the heat removed to protect it and keep it operating, our cells are under what's called oxidative stress, and they need to be cooled as well. And this is done by the mitochondria in the cell interacting with the near-infrared radiation from the sun and generating cellular melatonin and nitric oxide and other things that help keep the cells stabilized. So if we go back to the beginning of life, there are several studies that show that the human eye begins to develop in the womb. Near-infrared, amazingly enough, plays a role in the proper shape development of the human eyeball, not only in the womb, but after a child is born up till about the age of 13 years old. Now, here's where it's really interesting. When a woman is pregnant, her skin and the amniotic fluid effectively block the visible and ultraviolet light from reaching the fetus. However, her thinning skin and also the amniotic fluid allows the near-infrared to pass through to reach the baby and work on the eye development. And again, if you see in the chart here, the visible spectrum is all blocked, and all of this light, which is the near-infrared, is passing through the baby. Under natural light, under artificial light, virtually nothing is going in to reach the fetus. In addition, our eyes are actually an amazing receptor of near-infrared energy. We get over 10 times the amount of near-infrared that passes into our eyes compared to the visible spectrum. And this helps reduce simulates nitric oxide compounds, which helps stabilize the retina and keep the eyes developing. And again, if you look at the bottom picture, in nature, this is all the near-infrared, and in our artificial light, this is all we're getting here, and we're totally ignoring all this stuff. And what's interesting about this is even with your eyes closed, the near-infrared radiation passes through the eyelids and is reached by the retina. So being outdoors in near-infrared, between your skin and your body absorbing it and the eyes, you're getting literally bathed in near-infrared radiation. So what's happened because we've removed it from the child's development? Myopia, which is nearsightedness, has become a worldwide epidemic. It is projected at the current rate over 50% of the population will be nearsighted by 2050, and they'll be requiring glasses. And we see that now in our children. When I was in school, if a couple of kids wore glasses, it was a lot. We even teased them and called them four eyes. Now it's not uncommon to see half a class of grade school children wearing glasses. The Chinese have actually reckoned this, as well as some of the schools in Europe. The Chinese have requirements that their kids go outside for several hours a day. And there are several schools in Europe that are holding classes outdoors, weather permitting, obviously not in the wintertime. Interesting side benefit that's been studied and statistically proven is that students who study in natural outdoor light perform on average 15 to 20% better than students who are studying in artificial light. So it's kind of interesting, again, how sunlight is really affecting how we operate on many levels. It even penetrates the brain. Who would have thought that light goes through the skull? Near-infrared passes through the skull, and it picks up the light channels within the gray matter and is transmitted deep into the brain to stimulate a whole host of neurological activities in the brain. There's an amazing amount of work being done right now on using near-infrared treatments for Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, and there's even been very successful work on treating with post-traumatic stress disorder that our veterans are experiencing. They've actually created a helmet that they put on their heads, bombarded with the near-infrared radiation that seems to have a pretty remarkable effect. In fact, excuse me, an entire industry has been developed based on what's called photobiomodulation. Photobiomodulation is where the body is exposed to high intensity, short doses of near infrared to treat various ailments. What this industry is trying to do is replace nature. They are providing a short dose of radiation at a high intensity. A very recent study showed that this treatment has actually been able to eliminate breast cancer cells in mice. It's based on the theory of the laws of photochemistry, which basically says that everything is constant, that a long exposure of low intensity, which I'll equate to what you get outside in the sun, has the same effect of a short exposure at a high intensity, which is basically what the photomodulation devices are trying to do for us. Give me 1 second. One of the interesting things we've discovered about blue light, LEDs, and sunlight is how it affects our sleep. We've all heard about circadian rhythm. Simply put, it's the body's internal clock that uses melatonin produced in our bodies to help regulate our sleep cycles. We've all heard warnings about unplugging from electronic devices about an hour before bedtime. The reason for this is that the blue portion of the spectrum, which is the predominant spectral output of screens and LED bulbs, actually stops our circadian clock cold and causes to shift several hours, which has a dramatic impact of interrupting our REM and our NREM sleep patterns. There's been a huge amount of money spent in trying to decipher what's happening. Billions of dollars in the industry trying to understand how melatonin from the pineal gland is creating all this issue. And before the explosion of electronic devices, there were very few, if any, melatonin supplements on the market. Now there's a host of them, each of them promising, but unfortunately not delivering a better night's sleep. Silas, in conjunction with the University of Texas a couple of years ago, did some research on melatonin and looked at the melatonin, which was generated in the pineal gland. And we've reached an interesting conclusion that it does not appear to produce enough melatonin to actually regulate sleep the way we thought. There's another melatonin, which I briefly mentioned earlier, called cellular melatonin. And we feel that's got a significantly more positive impact on sleep. And guess where it comes from? Cellular melatonin is generated by cells interacting with near-infrared energy. And the amount of cellular melatonin has been shown to be significantly higher than the melatonin produced by the pineal gland. This work's been formally published in the Melatonin Research Journal, and it's actually been used by a Dr. Schul, who does video presentations of continuing education called MedCram. And he used this paper for the basis of a 2-hour presentation called Lighting is Health. I want to take a quick detour for a minute and talk a little bit about COVID. When we look at the age distribution of COVID cases, unlike the common flu, we see a remarkable low incidence of COVID within children. And over the past 36 months, there's a large body of evidence that has shown that cellular melatonin, for some reason, attacks the COVID virus. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and here's a little bit of math. As we said before, cellular melatonin is generated by the cell's interaction with near-infrared energy. A child's mass is significantly smaller than that of an adult, and since NIR is penetrating the body well over an inch, a higher percentage of their cells are being bombarded by this energy. This gives them a much higher level of cellular melatonin compared to an adult, and even when you look at to an obese adult, which have had one of the higher mortality rates from COVID. It could be a possible explanation of the lack of incidence we see of COVID in children. So I'll pose an open question. Is it possible that locking ourselves down indoors instead of being outside exacerbated the COVID infection rate? They also have discovered recently that the amount, and we know this, that the amount of near infrared that reaches the surface of the Earth varies by latitude, where it is higher towards the equator and lower up in north. And now we're showing data that seems to be a correlation between latitude and the severity of the infection. And these two pictures are just sort of an illustration. If you took a flashlight as a kid and you shined it through your hand, the light passed through very heavily because your body was very thin and there was not a lot of mass there. the same light passed to a 60-year-old barely makes it through. And that's the same concept of how the near infrared we feel is reacting to the body and creating cellular melatonin. Again, when we look at blue light from electric lighting and blue light from natural lighting, blue light is primarily the sole peak in an LED light, where blue is very small with respect to what is in nature. If you look at what's in nature in the near infrared dwarfs what's in the visible spectrum. So blue, but don't get me wrong about blue light, 'cause I've been giving it a bad name for a while. Blue light has good and bad benefits to it. Good light is good. Blue light is good because it excites the brain in the morning. It gets you going. It helps you see. But this was also causing stress as our cells. And there comes a time that you've got to dial it back. And again, the interesting in nature is we're never exposed to blue without a corresponding overdose of near infrared, which we theorize is combating the negative effects of the blue light that we see. This brings me to a major concern of the blue spectrum. The predominant spectrum of a LED is 440 nanometers, which is the blue light spectrum. It has been shown that that particular spectrum of light is related to causing age-related macular degeneration. That's the gradual destruction of the retina, which leads to blindness in older adults. And blue light, again, is a primary cause for all of this. So what have we done? We've removed most of the sunlight spectrum from our artificial lighting. We've coated our windows to block everything but visible light. So if you're working in a building, an office, manufacturing plant, or sitting in a classroom, you're effectively working in a black cave absent of near infrared energy. If I was to take an infrared picture of that room, it would be black. Now we come a little bit about nature, and I'll only spend a couple of minutes here. We're seeing the same thing in nature. In the beaches in Florida, they required coastal residents to turn their lights off at night because it interrupts the turtles' nesting and mating habits. We're seeing reproductive issues in bees and butterflies. Theory is that this related to the proliferation of outdoor LED lighting and light pollution. A colleague of mine raises exotic birds, parrots and so forth, taken from the Brazilian jungles and the like. And prior to LEDs, they use incandescent lights to light the cages up, and everything was fine because the incandescent pretty much mirrored what was coming off the sun for the birds. Now the cages have LED lights in them, and he's seeing issues developing in these birds that are in captivity that he hasn't seen before. And they were not present in the birds before the LED lights. And we found over 70 publications right now that are studying the impact of artificial light with respect to animal behavior. But I'm sure now there are probably a lot more as it's really been reaching the forefront. It's also impacting how we feed the world. We're doing an increasing amount of indoor farming. And as we all know, a plant grows best when it's outdoors in the sunlight. So how do you do it indoors? Each iteration of study shows that you need certain spectrums of light for leaf growth, certain spectrums of light for the development of fruit and so forth. And each iteration is revealing that near infrared is needed at some point in the cycle development of the plant. And again, all the artificial lighting is devoid of near infrared, and they're wrestling with that because to introduce it causes the energy cost to skyrocket, making it non-economical to produce plants indoors. So here are just some recent headlines that we've pulled from papers and publications. The link between breast cancer and LEDs. Why is natural light better? Reversing Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Blue light's got a dark side. Lighting is medicine. LED street lights, doctors issue a warning. So you can see that we're getting a fair amount of traction on what is happening with the light. Now, the lighting industry is a behemoth. It's over $130 billion a year. So it's not an easy industry to get to shift to focus, but they've begun to recognize that there's something not quite right. And everybody says, I don't like an LED, but I can't quite explain what it is. But what the market has done, and these are purely marketing gimmicks, is they've gone to color shifting bulbs that you can change with your smartphone. They're selling different types of bulbs for each room, such as a bright blue light for the kitchen and a soft redder light for the bedroom. they've come out what they're calling full spectrum bulbs. And unfortunately, Wikipedia incorrectly defines that definition as the full visible spectrum and doesn't take into account the invisible portion. And all these iterations have one thing in common. They lack the near-infrared radiation that is necessary for our health. And the medical community has even started to embrace the concept that we do not need to have a chemical solution to all of our health problems. This is nothing new. During the Spanish flu pandemic, doctors routinely put patients outside, and they had amazing statistical results in the recovery of the flu of patients who were outside in the sun getting near infrared radiation. Now, this is where Silas comes in. We have what we think is the next generation light bulb. This is the advertisement, I guess. If you look at, this is what most of our LEDs are doing right now. The yellow line is what the sun spectrum at noon is. And this is the bulb that our company has invented called NIRA that emits over 96% of the solar spectrum. So the bulb pretty much matches what the sun is putting out in a light bulb. So we're feeling that this is the next generation. This bulb will extend the life. Our engineers calculate that it's going to last over 50,000 hours. The industry standard for use of a light bulb is based on 3 hours a day. So in theory, this light bulb is going to last 45 years. So it's basically a once purchase and done with it. I want to discuss this very briefly. It's a little bit technical, but I think it'll help understanding a couple of other issues that relate to the LED lights. When an incandescent light bulb, the energy is reduced, the filament glows less brightly, and that's what causes it to dim. It's like a fire going out. It goes from white to that soft orange glow. An LED chip cannot do that. It's either physically on or off. The technical term for dimming an LED is called pulse width modulation. The LED is rapidly turned on and off, and the more it is off, the dimmer it appears that to your brain that it's getting. And it's just a trick of the mind. But at some point, your brain picks up this modulation, and we notice as what's called flicker. And this can either happen consciously or subconsciously. And for anyone who's old enough to remember the old fluorescent light bulbs, when they were first invented, they had a serious flicker problem. And there are people today who can't walk into shopping centers with fluorescent light bulbs because they develop headaches. The Department of Energy has even produced, some information of what flicker can do: neurological problems, headaches, migraines, going back to near infrared, increased autistic behavior, the slowing and stopping of motion. So there are pretty dramatic detriments to the flicker coming out of light bulbs. The industry standard for an LED light bulb is that it goes down to its 30% of its original brightness to be called dimmable and what's called flicker free. Again, because of the way it's dimmed, it goes from a bright white to a dull white. The NIRA bulb's a little bit different. We can go from a bright white, which is on over here, dim through the old-fashioned look of an incandescent before we turn off. And during all phases of this dimming cycle, we are producing near-infrared radiation. It's through a patented technology that we've got that it gets us down to 1 or 2% of its full brightness. And that's pretty much covering the technology that we've been involved with. And I think I only scratched the surface of what we found. I think each of the areas that I went over could probably be a whole presentation by itself. Our point now is we'd love to get the industry, research people, universities to help along with some of the research that's done, because all the research that's being done today, for the most part, is focusing solely on the visible spectrum of the lighting. The Department of Energy did a massive study at nursing homes in Los Angeles to see how residents responded to various light colors. The same was done at Mount Sinai Hospital to look at the effect of healing and mood, both of patients and workers, based on the color of light. They did their studies with the visible spectrum only. And it's our contention that if the study was done with near infrared enhanced lighting, that they would see dramatically different results. And with that, I think I'll turn it back to Dr. Durbach. And I will put this up if you want some other information. Our website is niralighting.com. It's got some more technical information. It's got a link to about 40 or 50 technical papers that support everything I've been saying today. So it's not just a shot in the dark. It's all been supported by pretty scientific research. Dr. Durback, you're on mute.
I think, okay. Thank you very, very much, Ken. That was an absolutely brilliant presentation about something that most people have no knowledge about. I am very interested in following up with you on this, and I'm sure that many people that will be watching your video will be very interested in getting the information.
Well, I'll put a plug in. You can reach us through the website, niralighting.com. There's a link that you can send me an email to, and we're happy to provide any other information people want.
But before we go to question, I would like to, you talked about the pulse with the modulation and NIRA dimmer light. So could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, again, an incandescent bulb, I've lost a slideshow here for a second, give me a beginning. An incandescent light bulb dims by reducing the voltage, which causes the filament to glow less bright, like a fire going out. You throw a lot of wood in a fire, you get a bright flame off of it. As the wood burns down, there's less energy going into the fire and it gets dim. An LED is a digital device that is either on or off. If you think of like a computer, switch 0 and 1 from that perspective. So the LED is putting out either full brightness light or it's turned off. Actually, if you took an LED bulb and took the cover off of it, the LEDs are so bright, you would not be able to look at them. That dome blocks a significant amount of light from coming through to give us what we need to look at. But in any event, what happens with your brain is that your brain is fooled as this thing is cycling several thousand times a second between on and off. As the space between the cycles gets bigger, as you see here, the bulb appears to your brain to be dimmer. In actuality, it's just off more than it's on. And your brain is being fooled to think the light is getting dim. At some point, the brain detects that and it picks up the fact that there's an off cycle and an on cycle, and that's what you start to see as the flicker. And you don't have to see flicker visibly to have it impact your body. Your brain is recognizing it well before your eyes are. And that's where some of the effects that I mentioned here are coming from, the neurological problems, epilepsy, migraines, and so forth. Help?
That's thank you. That was very helpful. Now, does that mean basically, did you do any research on the relationship of the neurological and other eye problems and health problems with the amount of time that we spend on computers?
We've looked at that briefly. Again, all of the electronic devices, whether they're computers, smartphones, TVs, tablets, are all producing an excess of blue light. And again, because of the technology behind the displays, there's no near infrared radiation behind it. What we've done in the short term to combat that, and I have one in my office and some people in Princeton have them, is we've developed a desk lamp that actually runs on direct current, uses a variant of our bulb with a fairly high concentration of near infrared. And that actually right now is sitting over my head on my bookcase and is bathing me in the near infrared radiation to help offset the blue that's coming from the screen. If you remember the slide I showed in the beginning, that in sunlight, we're never exposed to blue in the natural environment without an excess of near infrared. So we're hoping that this desk lamp that we sort of created helps, improve the working environment in front of computers. The people in Princeton have somewhat said that they feel better, they feel more relaxed, but that's a very qualitative thing. We have looked at, and there's something that's on our radar of things to look at, is how do we introduce the near infrared spectrum in some of the display panels, so that the screen, at the same time of producing the graphic information you're looking at, is also producing the beneficial near infrared to balance that. But that's something that's sort of down the road for us at this point.
But you are doing actual research on this, because the studies show that children from very, very young age are now sitting on computers and spending hours and hours indoors on the computers.
Well, like we said,
you're talking about, pardon?
Over 90% of our time has been spent indoors, and a lot of that is on computers and
That's correct.
devices. So yeah, it's a major problem, but it's not just the computer issue is probably another whole social commentary in terms of how that's affecting children and so forth. But the whole indoor environment, whether it be computer screens, the lighting in the room, ambient lighting, window coatings, that's where we're focusing our look on the health. We understand that the computers are an issue, but I think it's more of a social issue as opposed to a scientific issue. If we solve the problem of the scientific ability of putting near infrared back into the computer, it still doesn't solve the issue of kids being on computers for that long a period of time. So there's two factors in play here, I think.
Well, you're correct. There's multi-dimensional factors in all of this, but from what you're saying, if the lighting affects not only the development of any diseases, but it also affects how should I say, the extent of the diseases that are affected for people that are aging, like macular degeneration, which has really blossomed. Those factors are, and the computers, you are basically looking at a world where a lot of people are going to be blind, and a lot of children are not going to be able to see well.
Well, we saw that with the myopia statistics. They're predicting again, half the world will be nearsighted by 2050. And it's purely related to the lack of near infrared radiation. I forget the name of the organization, but they compiled probably 4,000 to 5,000 papers on the detrimental effect of blue light on the human body. There are also some papers in there on the positive effects of blue light, because there are some medical professionals who are using certain frequencies of blue light for doing some medical treatment. I'm not exactly sure that really works or if it's quack medicine, but there's a lot of research being done on how blue light affects the body in all aspects of it, not only the eyes.
Well, thank you. It's very important information, and I was hopefully a lot of people are going to take this seriously and implement your lighting discovery. By the way, can you show us the light that you have above in your office, the one that you recommend?
Yeah, give me 1 second. It's a very straightforward desk lamp. It's just an architectural desk lamp. It articulates, and
Yeah,
not blind anybody, but it's got a DC bulb in it, so it's using very little energy, 48 volt DC. The DC version of the bulb, because of the technology, has zero flicker to it whatsoever, which is, that's one of the benefits of using it, as well as the near infrared coming off of it. The AC version has a little bit of flicker to it, but nowhere near what the regular bulbs on the market have in them.
thank you. And where can one purchase the DC bulbs?
The DC bulbs right now are only going to be sold in conjunction with this desk lamp, because if you take a DC bulb and you screw it into a light socket, it's going to burn out. It won't work. So we're hopefully within the next week, we will have them up on our website for sale, and they would come with the DC bulb already installed in it.
That is exactly what I wanted to hear. All right,
And
Susie.
so I know my chief research officer, Scott Zimmerman, is someplace on this Zoom meeting. So Scott, you're on notice to start producing some desk lamps.
Thank you very, very much, Ken. As I said, it was a very, very educational presentation, which teaches a lot.
Glad to have been able to do it for you.
Yeah. Over to you, Susie.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach, and thank you so much, Ken. The discussions today show that technology with the types of lighting you mentioned in your presentation is such a large part of today's social and professional world. So how can we best cope with being exposed to this light so frequently and reduce the implication on our health while we wait for more permanent solutions to be implemented?
That's actually a very easy answer. Get outside. I didn't put a slide up for it because this presentation could have gone on forever, but the near-infrared radiation that comes off the sun follows several patterns. The closer you are to the equator, the stronger the near-infrared is. The further you are towards the pole, northern regions, the less concentration it is. The only thing that it has in common is that in the early morning, from say sunrise to about 10 o'clock, the near-infrared radiation is at its highest concentration. Then it shifts to ultraviolet from about 10 to 2, which is why you've heard the phrase, don't go out in the midday sun. That's because at that particular time, it's a predominantly ultraviolet spectrum that's coming down to the earth. And then from about 2 to sunset, we shift back to the near infrared. So if you have the ability to go out for a morning or afternoon walk, that's the best thing to do. And you don't have to be out in the sunlight. As I said in the beginning, the near infrared bounces off of almost everything outside. So walking in the shade, you're still getting bombarded by the near infrared, and it passes through your clothing. And so unless you're wearing, 15 layers of a down jacket, you're getting bombarded by near infrared. So that's the best thing to do, is to be outside as best you can, and reduce that 94% indoor occupancy down as best you can.
Thanks, that makes sense. So at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that 16% of the world's energy is used for lighting. Do you think we can reduce this percentage? And just thinking from the lens of the broader energy transition in support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, do you think this will have a significant impact?
That was the whole intent of going to LED lights, was that we were going to reduce the energy consumption dramatically. That's in process right now, that this is taking place. So we're, as a world, moving towards that direction. The one thing and this is a major miss on my part, the one thing that I neglected to mention about the NIRA light bulb is that we have put the near infrared spectrum back into the bulb without compromising energy consumption. That's been the whole problem with the industry, is that as you try to approach that part of the spectrum, the energy consumption skyrockets to the point where the bulb is using more energy than the old-fashioned incandescent. So it just wasn't working. Our bulb puts the near infrared back at the same ratio that the sunlight does without the energy constraints that the current LEDs have. So there's basically a net zero effect of converting from our LED, from the other original LEDs to our LED. That was a big miss on my part. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you for that. That's very interesting. So do you know kind of like broader timelines that are being put into place for this type of lighting to be implemented?
DC lamp's going to be available very shortly. We're actually working with Princeton University right now. Princeton University is very keen on converting their campus to direct current lighting because they can fund it with solar and renewable resources. And we're in the process right now of doing a couple of very large rooms within the campus, converting them from the old-fashioned, I won't call them old-fashioned, the current LEDs to our LED in a special configured bulb that we're making for them. But again, our biggest issue right now, unfortunately, as I mentioned off camera, was a supply chain issue. We're forced to get most of our stuff from China overseas. It's difficult getting materials here. You cannot source, you pretty much can't source anything that goes into an LED light bulb in the United States.
Wow.
which is really frustrating. So that's our big issue right now. But we are set up right now. We have a manufacturing venture with Mexico to assemble these things for us. We're just a matter of now trying to get the components in place to produce a quantity enough where we can get going. We're at the point now we probably can produce maybe 1,000 bulbs, but that's really a drop in the bucket, obviously.
Yeah. And are we like exploring other countries to work with to get this?
Yeah, we're looking at a couple of things. And again, from our perspective of Silas, we're not looking to become bulb manufacturers. That's it's a crazy industry to get involved with. So we're looking at cross licensing with some other companies and that kind of thing to get the technology out there quickly. Because like I said, the industry alone is over $100 billion. That's a lot of light bulbs. I mean, the United States goes through 6 billion light bulbs a year. So it's
right.
That's a lot of production.
Yeah.
And that one company can't produce all that. So we were trying to, get it out into the environment. Our biggest issue, as I think you alluded to, is that nobody understands this technology. No one's aware of it. Without exception, every doctor that we speak to has no clue about near-infrared radiation. It's like they've never heard of it. So it's a big education process, and it's not the kind of thing you can do in a 3-minute elevator ride. It's pretty complicated, as we saw with what we talked about today. And again, I only scratched the surface today of what's out there.
Right. It's crazy because, like you said, we're trying to roll this out quickly, and I think it'll have such a positive impact on human health and the environment. But then with the supply chain issues, that's kind of like the big theme that we're facing with lots of issues today. So it makes sense. So one of our audience members was wondering what can happen to a person if they limit the amount of natural light for long periods of time in their lives. Like you mentioned, they should be getting outside, but what are like the really negative implications of limiting natural light?
I think what happens is, it's kind of hard to explain because there's no one causal thing. It depends on everyone's metabolism, and there are so many other factors like your environment, what you eat, your diet, your exercise habits, medication, genetics, all play a role in how we age. The problem is that when you remove the near-infrared radiation from your environment, you're putting your cells under a lot of oxidative stress. And that causes the cells to basically collapse prematurely, work hard. It's like I allude to the car engine. It's like trying to run your car with no oil in the crankcase. You'll go for about a mile and then it's going to seize up. Well, the same thing is going to happen to your body, not that dramatically. It's going to take place over time and that kind of thing. So it was funny because in one of the presentations I did of a similar organization, one of the gentlemen was a nuclear engineer on a submarine. And he spent 2 years underwater with ever seeing sunlight. And he started to panic because he's saying, how is that affecting me? And we don't know the real long-term effects, but we see it in the autism, in dementia, in myopia, in Alzheimer's, the post-traumatic stress. All these things are cumulative diseases. You don't wake up one day and have autism. You can wake up and have a cold or laryngitis, but you don't wake up with autism. It's something that develops over time, and everyone's genetics is different.
Right. That makes sense. And have you personally witnessed the negative impacts of excessive exposure to certain lightings or lack of exposure to natural lighting?
I have not myself personally, but I will give you an anecdote of the reverse. I don't follow my own rules, and I will read books on my iPad before going to bed or watching TV. And my wife yells at me for doing that. And I said, okay, let's try an experiment. I will admit that there's not an LED light bulb in my house. I have all incandescents that we've managed to pirate over the years. And I have an incandescent lamp on my nightstand in my bed. And after I'm done reading, I close my eyes and I stare at this lit light bulb for about 2 minutes. And as I remember what I said, near infrared penetrates through the eyelid, and your eyes are probably the biggest receptor in the body for generating near infrared. So I stare at this light bulb for 2 or 3 minutes. Then without opening my eyes, I turn the light off. Now, when you stare at a light bulb, you get a really bright orange color by looking at the light through the, the color of your skin. When the light turns off, it goes to a really cool blue, almost the color of your blouse, and that slowly fades away, and I fall asleep. And if I don't do that, I'll roll around for a while. My wife has actually come in a couple of times and turned the light off because I fell asleep looking at it. What I think is happening is it goes back to the whole comment of cellular melatonin, the pineal gland, circadian rhythm. I think that large concentrated dose of near-infrared radiation is kicking the clock back in and allowing me to go to sleep. Purely a theory, purely a subjective study. We didn't do any kind of detailed measurements on it with sleep doctors and so forth, but that's sort of a reverse of what you were asking.
Right. Wow, that's really fascinating. And so on smartphones, I'm sure you're aware of the mode that decreases the blue light and makes the screen more yellow.
Yep.
Are you aware of whether this night mode really works?
It helps to an extent. Again, the feeling we have is that you're reducing the amount of blue and shifting it to the yellows and greens, but you're not introducing the near infrared to balance the blue, so you are still getting blue. And they also have blue blocking glasses, which you can wear, which have a similar kind of effect. I think the jury is still out of how effective those things are.
I have a pair right here.
There you go. See? Again, that's part of the problem that we're facing as a company, is that all of the research up until recently has been focusing on the visible spectrum and not the impact of the near infrared spectrum.
Can I jump in for just a second?
Sure, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the point, Dr. Seaholt's videos in particular, if I could recommend anything, it would be to look at some of his videos that he's published, and some of them are quite long, but they really go into a lot more detail about the effect of near infrared and it's really quite interesting how the medical community, it used to be that lighting was always driven by a separate group, the lighting industry. But now what's happening is the medical community is starting to accept that the environmental factors such as sunlight have a big impact on your health. And I think if you, like I say, if you look at Dr. Seaholt's videos, he just did one just a few days ago. He did a TV spot in the UK on Talk TV with Dr. Bull. And it was, I think it would help a lot with people to see, because he does he looks at it from a very, from the medical side, but with a lot of down home common sense statements. Kind of like Ken's presentation. It helps a lot. Anyway, that was my comment.
You can find. Thank you, Scott. Scott, by the way, is the brainchild behind the light bulb. I mentioned that. The website is Medcram, MEDCRAM, and he produces, his main business is producing continuing education for the medical community. But he also has the free sites, and this one that Scott just mentioned, it's 2 hours long, and amazingly enough, the basis for a good portion of it is one of the papers that we published with cellular melatonin. So that's why we're kind of fascinated by his involvement in the whole thing, because he's really on board with what we're doing.
Makes sense. Definitely will check it out. And you mentioned that you've spoken to lots of doctors that aren't even aware of some of these implications. Is part of kind of like your widespread campaigns and communications, are you kind of partnering with any doctors to get
at this point? We're not. We have talked to several pediatricians who are interested. We haven't really formalized anything, because we feel that, again, when you look at the market for the light bulb or the near infrared affects every demographic differently. It affects children differently than teenagers, than young adults, and senior citizens. And if we try to market to all of those at the same time, we're going to end up marketing to nobody. So our feeling right now is that children are probably the primary market, because if we can catch the issues early on, we will be preventing the long-term things from happening. And hopefully it will then spread from that point.
Yeah, one other quick point is that the original work was done with Professor Ritter. Professor Ritter has been 40 years in melatonin research, and he's the editor of Melatonin Research magazine with 100,000 citations. And so that was what the original paper was that Dr. Seeholt has been talking about. But now here recently, we're also teamed up, we're starting I was just on the phone with Professor John Luis down in Miami. John Luis has been focused on the issues associated with lighting in the Black community. And if you do from an optical standpoint, the Black community is more strongly affected, especially at higher latitudes, than the white community. And we've been asked to write a paper for some of the lighting company or lighting magazines associated with understanding equality within lighting, because the reality is the Black community has an entirely different, while they can go outside and not have to worry about skin cancer like we have, they also require a higher level of exposure in certain parts of the spectrum in order to generate the same healthy benefits of sunlight. So I think that what you'll see is that the lighting industry, as it moves more and more towards wellness and health aspects like circadian, will start to understand that we have to start adapting to individuals, not just to general people. And no, Dr. Jean Luis, his comment was he's been really a proponent of trying to get the Black community to understand the effect of sunlight, because in general, a person with dark skin color sleeps 1 hour less than a person of lighter skin color in North America. So, you know, and he's been trying to bring that out, and we're going to be doing a joint paper here pretty soon associated with that. So there is I agree with you totally. This will be driven by the medical community. It will not be driven by the lighting community, is my opinion.
Thank you. What sources of research would you recommend as like the best sources to look at if someone wants to learn more about the impacts of blue lighting on their health, and what are they like mainly telling us?
You know, Google's an amazing tool. You Google blue light and health, you Google near infrared and health, you Google age-related macular degeneration and blue light. Any combination of those search terms is going to get you to a whole host of things. Some will be commercial advertising products, but there's a lot of National Institute of Health has a lot of papers that get published on the subject. So there's a whole host of resources out there in the public medical publication community that supports all of this stuff. It's just a matter of putting in the right search term for what your specific question is.
Another question that just came in from the audience was, melatonin is used to induce relaxation and sleep. How does it prevent COVID?
Well, like we said before, for some biological reason, cellular melatonin in the body attacks the COVID virus. So that's why we theorize that children are not seeing COVID, because their bodily concentrations of cellular melatonin are significantly higher than adults due to their small mass. So I'm not sure what the biological mechanism is that's going that direction, but it's just that there's a whole, if you Google, again, 3 years ago, if you Googled cellular melatonin and COVID, you got nothing. Now you'll get a couple of hundred papers. Some saying yes, it works, some saying no, it doesn't work, but the majority of them saying yeah, there's some kind of correlation here. It doesn't attack other viruses, but for some reason it attacks the COVID virus.
Interesting. And then last question for you, thank you so much for all the responses so far, is what would be the main piece of advice or takeaway you'd leave the students who joined the conference here today?
Well, depending on what their field of study is and where their endeavors are going, my biggest concern, and I've had this all through my educational experiences, when you come to making a decision about something or looking at a particular issue, try to look at the unintended consequences of your decision. Don't just look at, I've got this solution to problem X. Okay, if I solve problem X, what is that going to do down the line to Y, Z, A, B, and C? Because in a lot of cases, you're going to find that what looks like a really wonderful idea is catastrophic. And I think that's what we're seeing with the light bulb. It was a wonderful idea to reduce energy, and it worked very well at doing that, but the end results have been catastrophic for our health. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice I can give to students going into any kind of research or that kind of thing.
Makes complete sense. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Durbeck.
Thank you very, very much, Ken. Not only your presentation was brilliant, but I also want to thank your colleague for his comments and recommendations. I really hope that you'll make tremendous progress in your work and that we all will be suffering less from all the illnesses that you have discussed, because actually we need a healthier society rather than a more sick society. So thank you and have a very, very good week. And Susie, thank you very much for hosting. Goodbye.
My pleasure, Doctor. Thank you.